A boy, a loyal dog, and a tragedy no one saw coming. One moment, laughter filled the air as they raced side by side. The next, sirens screamed, doctors whispered, and a mother prayed over a son who wouldn't wake up. Hope faded, days turned to silence, but the dog refused to leave. He stayed by the boy's side, waiting, watching, until he did something so unbelievable that even the doctors broke down in tears. What happened in that hospital room left everyone speechless. And it all began on one fateful afternoon. If you believe that miracles can happen, leave a heart in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe before diving into this heartfelt story. The town of Willow Creek was a place where life moved at a gentle pace. It was the kind of town where neighbors knew each other by name, where children rode their bikes until the sun dipped below the horizon, and where the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers filled the air. Among the many children who filled the streets with laughter, one boy stood out, 8-year-old Ethan Carter. Ethan was the kind of child who could turn the most ordinary day into an adventure. He had boundless energy, a radiant smile, and eyes that gleamed with curiosity. Whether it was building forts out of blankets, pretending to be a pirate, or racing down the street on his bicycle, he lived in a world full of wonder. And by his side, through every adventure, was Max. Max was a golden retriever with warm brown eyes that seemed to understand everything. He had been part of the Carter family since Ethan was just a baby. And as the years passed, the two had grown inseparable. Max was more than a pet, he was Ethan's shadow, his protector, his most loyal companion. No matter where Ethan went, Max followed. If Ethan ran, Max ran. If Ethan laughed, Max wagged his tail. At night, when Ethan slept, Max curled up at the foot of his bed, as if keeping watch over his little boy. That summer afternoon was like any other. The sun was high in the sky, casting golden light over the quiet suburban streets. Ethan had finished his lunch quickly, eager to go outside and ride his bicycle. His mother, Emily Carter, watched from the porch as her son strapped on his helmet and called out to Max. "Come on, Max, let's go." Ethan's voice was full of excitement, his laughter carried by the warm breeze. Max barked happily and trotted alongside him, his tail wagging. Ethan pedaled fast, the wind rushing past his face as he rode down the familiar road. He loved the feeling of speed, the thrill of the ride. His sneakers barely touched the pedals as he zoomed forward, Max running beside him, his paws pounding against the pavement. But then, in a single heartbeat, everything changed. Ethan had just turned the corner onto a quiet street when a truck came barreling down the road. The driver, distracted by his phone, didn't see the boy in time. The screech of tires tore through the air, followed by a sickening thud. Ethan's small body was thrown off his bike. He tumbled through the air before hitting the pavement hard. His helmet rolled away, and his bicycle lay in a twisted heap a few feet away. The world seemed to freeze. Max skidded to a stop, his ears perked in alarm. And then, instinct took over. The golden retriever let out a heart-wrenching howl and bolted toward Ethan. He reached his boy's side within seconds, his nose pressing against Ethan's cheek, his warm tongue licking at his face, desperate to wake him up. But Ethan didn't move. His body lay still, his breathing shallow. Max whined, nudging Ethan with his head, his tail tucked between his legs. He barked frantically, his voice filled with panic, as if calling for help. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, their faces filled with shock and worry. Someone screamed. Another person pulled out their phone to call for an ambulance. "Stay with him, Max," an older man said softly, watching as the dog refused to leave the boy's side. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics rushed out, their expressions grim as they assessed the situation. "We have a child, unconscious, possible head trauma," one of them called into his radio. Max growled low in his throat when they tried to move Ethan. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't leave his boy. "Easy, buddy," one of the paramedics said gently. "We need to help him." Max didn't move. His brown eyes were filled with sorrow, his body trembling as he stood over Ethan protectively. Ethan's mother arrived moments later, her face pale with fear. "Oh my God, Ethan," she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. She stroked his hair, her voice breaking. "Baby, please wake up. The paramedics worked quickly, checking Ethan's pulse, securing him on a stretcher. Through it all, Max stayed close, his whimpers heartbreaking. When the time came to load Ethan into the ambulance, Max refused to be left behind. He jumped in after him, planting himself beside the stretcher, his head resting on Ethan's chest. One of the paramedics hesitated, glancing at his partner. "Let him stay," the other said. "He's not going anywhere." The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance sped away, its sirens wailing. Inside, Max never moved, his warm body pressed against Ethan's side, his eyes locked onto his boy's face, waiting, hoping, but Ethan didn't wake up. And as the hospital loomed ahead, Max let out a soft whimper, as if sensing that the hardest part of their journey was yet to come. The hospital's emergency room was a blur of movement and urgency as the ambulance pulled up. The doors flew open, and the paramedics rushed Ethan inside, their voices sharp and filled with urgency as they relayed his condition to the waiting doctors. 8-year-old male, bicycle accident, severe head trauma, unconscious since impact, BP is low, possible internal bleeding. Ethan's mother, Emily, ran alongside the stretcher, her heart pounding. "Please, he's just a little boy," she pleaded through her tears. "You have to save him." The doctors and nurses moved quickly, wheeling Ethan into the trauma bay. But as they turned the corner, a golden blur slipped past them. Max, the golden retriever, had refused to be left behind. Despite the chaos, despite the voices telling him to stop, he stayed close to Ethan, his brown eyes filled with fear and determination. "Ma'am, we can't allow the dog inside," a nurse told Emily, blocking the way. Emily wiped at her tears. "Please," she whispered, "that dog has never left my son's side. He won't understand why he has to now." The doctor in charge, Dr. Mitchell, hesitated for only a moment. He had been a doctor for over 20 years, had seen hundreds of cases like this. But there was something about the way Max looked at Ethan, the way his paws danced anxiously on the tile floor, that made him reconsider. "Let him stay," he finally said, "as long as he doesn't get in the way." Emily let out a breath of relief as she bent down, cupping Max's face. "You stay with Ethan, okay? Just like you always do." Max let out a soft whimper and licked her hand before trotting after the doctors, his tail low, his ears perked forward in worry. Inside the trauma bay, the team worked quickly. Machines beeped, IV lines were inserted. The flashing numbers on the monitor showed how fragile Ethan's condition was. And through it all, Max lay down beside the stretcher, his nose pressed against Ethan's hand. Minutes stretched into hours. Ethan was rushed into surgery, and Max sat outside the doors, unmoving. Nurses passed by, doctors whispered in hushed tones. But Max never left his spot. His eyes remained on the door, his ears twitching at every sound. Emily sat on the bench beside him, her hands clasped together in silent prayer. "He's strong," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Ethan is strong. He has to wake up." Max let out a low whine and placed his head on her lap. The surgery lasted nearly 5 hours. When the doors finally swung open, Dr. Mitchell stepped out, his face tired but composed. "The surgery was successful," he said, and Emily let out a shaky breath of relief. But her heart clenched. "But what? He's in a coma." The words hit her like a blow. "A coma?" she echoed. Dr. Mitchell nodded solemnly. "We don't know how long it will last. It could be days, weeks, or longer." Emily covered her mouth with her hands, her body trembling. "But he'll wake up, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We hope so," the doctor said gently. "But we can't predict these things. All we can do is wait." Max's ears perked up as if he understood the gravity of the words. Ethan was moved to the intensive care unit, a place filled with quiet beeping monitors and the sterile scent of antiseptic. He looked so small in the hospital bed, wires attached to his body, his chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator. And Max, faithful, unwavering Max, jumped onto the hospital bed and curled up beside him. A nurse stepped forward. "We really can't." Dr. Mitchell raised a hand. "Let him be," he said. "It might help." And so, Max stayed. Days passed, and Ethan remained still. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked his vitals, but there was no sign of change. But through it all, Max never left his side. He lay beside Ethan, his head resting against the boy's arm. If someone tried to move him, he would let out a low, stubborn whimper. Every night, when the lights dimmed and the hospital grew quiet, Max would nuzzle against Ethan, as if whispering silent encouragements only his boy could hear. "Come back," his soft brown eyes seemed to say. "I'm waiting." Doctors and nurses began to take notice. "There's something about that dog," one nurse murmured. "It's like he knows." Dr. Mitchell watched with curiosity. He had seen therapy animals before. But this was different. This was pure, unbreakable devotion. And then, something extraordinary happened. One evening, as the hospital hummed with the quiet sounds of night, Max did something that made the doctors stop in their tracks. He licked Ethan's hand. At first, it seemed like a simple gesture. But then, Ethan's fingers twitched. It was so small, so faint, that at first, no one was sure if they had imagined it. But then Max did it again, gently nudging Ethan's hand with his wet nose. And this time, the boy's fingers moved. The heart monitor picked up a slight change. A shift in rhythm. A nurse gasped. "Did you see that?" Dr. Mitchell hurried into the room, his eyes fixed on Ethan's hand. "Ethan?" he called gently. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. But Max wasn't done yet. The golden retriever let out a soft bark. A hopeful sound. As he pressed his warm body closer to Ethan, he licked the boy's cheek, nuzzling him the way he always did when trying to wake him in the morning. And then, a miracle. Ethan's eyelashes fluttered. Emily, who had been dozing in the chair beside the bed, jolted awake. "Ethan?" she gasped, rushing to her son's side. The beeping of the machine's change quickened, and then, slowly, as if rising from the deepest sleep, Ethan's eyelids lifted just a fraction. His lips parted, and though his voice was weak, barely more than a breath, the words that came next made everyone in the room freeze. "Max?" The dog let out a joyful bark and licked Ethan's face as if saying, "I told you I'd wait." Emily sobbed, covering her mouth. "Oh my God, baby, you're awake." Dr. Mitchell blinked rapidly, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He turned to the nurse beside him. "I've seen medical miracles before," he murmured, "but I've never seen anything quite like this." Max let out another bark, his tail wagging furiously. Ethan was weak, but his fingers curled slightly into Max's fur. He tried to smile. "You stayed," he whispered, and Max, faithful Max, let out a low, contented whimper as he curled up beside his boy, knowing his job wasn't finished just yet. But now, there was hope. The news of Ethan waking up spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses whispered in amazement, and doctors exchanged glances filled with both relief and wonder. Dr. Mitchell, a man who had seen countless medical cases in his long career, found himself standing at Ethan's bedside, watching as the boy slowly regained consciousness. But more than that, he was watching something even more extraordinary: the unwavering devotion of a dog who refused to leave his best friend's side. Ethan's body was still weak, his limbs sluggish, and his voice hoarse, but his eyes, those bright blue eyes that had once been full of boundless energy, now held something else, a deep understanding. His first words, whispered softly as he stroked Max's golden fur, had been simple yet profound. "You stayed." And Max, in the only way he knew how, wagged his tail and pressed his warm nose into Ethan's palm, letting out a soft whimper as if to say, "Of course, I did." Ethan's recovery was not immediate. The trauma from the accident had left his body frail, his muscles weak from the days spent in a coma. Physical therapy sessions were scheduled, and doctors warned that it could take weeks, maybe even months, before he could walk and move the way he once had. But through it all, Max was there. When the nurses helped Ethan sit up for the first time, Max was at the foot of the bed, tail thumping against the sheets as if cheering him on. When Ethan took his first sip of water, Max nuzzled his arm in encouragement. And when the therapists came to help him take his first steps again, Max walked beside him, step for step, never leaving his boy's side. At first, Ethan could barely take 2 steps without his legs trembling. His hands gripped the parallel bars in the rehabilitation room, his breath uneven. "I can't," he whispered one day, his face scrunched up in frustration. Emily, watching from the corner of the room, felt her heart break. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said gently. "It takes time." But Max had other plans. The golden retriever barked, drawing Ethan's attention. Then, in a slow, deliberate movement, Max took a step forward and looked back at Ethan expectantly. Ethan let out a breathy chuckle. "You're showing off, huh?" Max barked again, his tail wagging. Something in Ethan's heart warned. And then, mustering all the strength he had, Ethan took a step forward. Then another. It wasn't perfect. His legs wobbled, and the therapist was ready to catch him if he fell. But Max's presence gave him the courage to keep going. Good boy, Max, Ethan whispered. I guess if you're walking, I should too. The entire room broke into smiles. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's progress was nothing short of remarkable. His body grew stronger, his steps steadier, and every single day, Max was right there with him. The hospital staff had grown attached to the pair. Nurses often stopped by just to see Max, slipping him treats or giving him belly rubs. Even the most hardened doctors, ones who had spent decades in the medical field, found themselves deeply moved by what they were witnessing. One day, Dr. Mitchell walked into Ethan's room for a routine checkup. He had been monitoring the boy's recovery closely, and what he saw that day was something he would never forget. Ethan, now able to sit up comfortably, was laughing as Max rested his head on his lap. The boy's fingers ruffled the golden fur absent-mindedly, and Max's tail wagged lazily in response. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat. Ethan, how are you feeling today? Ethan grinned. Better. The doctor nodded, checking his chart. You've made incredible progress. Most children who go through something like this, well, they take much longer to recover. Ethan glanced down at Max, his smile widening. It's because of him. Dr. Mitchell folded his arms, a thoughtful expression on his face. You know, Ethan, in all my years of being a doctor, I've seen a lot of things. But this, he exhaled sharply, shaking his head, this is something special. And then, to the surprise of everyone in the room, Dr. Mitchell's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I truly believe Max helped you heal, he said softly. I've always believed in medicine, in science, but this is love. And love is the most powerful healer of all. Emily, standing at the doorway, wiped at her own tears. Thank you, she whispered, looking at Max, for saving my son. Max, as if understanding, let out a happy bark and licked Ethan's cheek, making the boy giggle. The day Ethan was discharged from the hospital was filled with both celebration and gratitude. The nurses gathered to say goodbye, and even Dr. Mitchell, normally reserved, patted Max on the head. You're a miracle worker, buddy, he murmured, as they left the hospital. Max trotted beside Ethan, his golden coat gleaming in the sunlight. Ethan, still moving carefully but stronger than before, held onto his leash as if anchoring himself to his best friend. When they arrived home, Ethan looked around, taking in the familiar sights of his front yard. The old oak tree where he used to climb, the swing set that swayed gently in the breeze. And then, without hesitation, he turned to Max and said, "Race you." With a joyful bark, Max took off, his paws kicking up the grass. Ethan, laughing, ran after him, his legs working, his body moving, his spirit free. His mother watched from the porch, her eyes filled with gratitude. The accident had changed their lives forever. It had brought fear, pain, and uncertainty. But through it all, one thing had remained unwavering: the love of a dog. And as Ethan and Max ran together under the golden sun, it was clear that no matter what came next, they would always have each other. Because some friendships are not just special, some friendships are forever.
What do you think about today's story? Do you believe situations like this can happen in real life? If you have any thoughts or feedback, feel free to leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exciting stories. See you in the next video.